Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel, Homeopathy Super Sessions by Dr. Jacos. Today I'll be taking the next chapter from J.H. Allen's book, Suppression of Miasms. Well, in the Chronic Disease Volume 1, Hahnemann says that the older physicians were more enlightened observers. So if you read the Chronic Disease Volume 1, Dr. Hahnemann says that the older physicians, they had more observing skills. Their practice was based upon experience alone. So whatever practice they were doing, it was only based upon the experience. So the experience of different doctors were naturally different. And it also caused a bit of a confusion, or rather more confusion, as each doctor had its own way of prescribing because of his personal experience. When they removed the psoric eruptions from the skin, it was followed by many ailments. So when a person had come with eruptions on the skin, which according to homeopathy, it was psoric in nature, they did not know about this and they removed the eruptions from the skin. After the skin eruptions were removed, naturally the person later on suffered from many more ailments. They tried to treat this disease, these ailments constitutionally and not locally. So the old school physicians, or those physicians who were good observers and their practice was based only upon experience, they removed the psoric eruptions constitutionally and not locally. However, thousands of practitioners recognize psora and all other miasms as an internal constitutional affection. So Dr. J.H. Allen says that many practitioners, or even thousands of practitioners, they recognize psora and all other miasms as an internal constitutional affection. So the psora is present in the internal of the person, and as a result of which it has its own constitutional effects. But however, they did not follow the method of Hahnemann while treating such miasmatic disease. So the sad part of it was that these physicians who were enlightened observers, their practice was based on experience alone. They tried to remove the ailments constitutionally, but they did not follow the method of Dr. Hahnemann. As a result of which, when the psoric eruptions of the skin were removed, it was followed by many ailments. So they could not recognize the law of similar and hence were unsuccessful in treating miasmatic disease. So these celebrated practitioners of the old school, they did not recognize the law of similars, and as a result of which they were unsuccessful in treating the miasmatic diseases. They thought that they had removed the psoric eruptions and the patient was all right, but later on the patient suffers from many other ailments. Why? This is because they drove the disease from the periphery to the center. So the disease was at its periphery, and then they removed it by their so-called constitutional treatment, and the disease, instead of getting better, it went from the periphery to the center. It went from the less important organs to the more important organs. And this was because the celebrated practitioners of the old school, they refused to follow the method of Dr. Hahnemann. They would have to believe in the life force behind the physiology and the pathology. So not only they have to believe in the law of similars, but also they have to believe in the life force or the vital force, which is behind all the physiological and all the pathological processes in our body. So the celebrated practitioners of the old school, number one, had to believe in the law of similars, and secondly, they had to believe in the life force. And they had to accept the dynamic theory of both life and disease. So they had to accept that life and disease are dynamic in nature. Many names were designated to the disease condition, including the miasmatic expressions, which were misleading. So the old schools, they had different names were given to different diseases, which also included their miasmatic expressions, but they were misleading. The names were misleading. The character of the lesion was associated with the part or organ affected, giving the disease its permanent name. So whatever lesion was there, or whatever part, or whatever system, or whatever organ was affected, its name was given accordingly, and its name was a permanent one. Along with this, the disease name, they correlated pathological and etiological explanation. So along with the disease name, they had to correlate the pathology as well as the causative explanation or the etiological explanation. This was done out of necessity in order to understand the disease in its whole extent. So they had done this because in order to understand the disease in its full extent, on its whole extent, the correlation of the disease to pathology and etiology was essential. The disease has a primary, secondary, and tertiary expression. So, as you all know, all the diseases have the expressions, namely primary, secondary, and tertiary. They could trace the disease to the true etiology or to the inimical forces acting from within. So, sorry, they couldn't trace the disease to the true etiology or to the inimical forces acting from within. So, basically, the allopathic doctors, they could not trace the disease and they could not identify the correct cause or the etiology because they believed in the non-dynamic or they believed in the materialistic school of medicine. They did not believe in the dynamic nature of disease and life, and also they did not believe in the miasmatic affections and actually also the law of similars. When the acute expressions have passed, they thought the disease had disappeared. So they treated the disease, and when the acute expressions were nullified by their medicines, they thought the disease was cured. But sadly, they returned to relapse again due to their predisposition. But it was so sad that the disease returned because of their predisposition. Now, in my previous video also, I've done about predisposition. I told you that Dr. J.H. Allen has defined predisposition as certain characteristics on the mental and the physical level. So, because of this predisposition or because of this certain characteristic traits which the patient had, the disease used to again relapse. Such a condition will arise because they don't understand the causa morbi, the miasms. So, why will this occur or why will the relapse occur? Because the orthodox school of medicine, they did not understand the causa morbi, that is the cause of the morbid disease, that is the miasms. Okay, so the orthodox school of treatment, they only recognize the materialistic cause of the disease. They did not believe in the dynamic nature of the disease, that is the miasms which were responsible for the disease existence. The miasms are the true etiological factors of the disease. So therefore, the miasms can be called as the true etiological factors of the disease. The miasm have to be studied in depth in order to understand its relation to the disease. So therefore, if you want to understand the relationship of the disease to the miasm, you have to study the disease in depth, including the miasms. So you can equate the miasms with the disease, or certain characteristic expressions of miasms are there which can be equated to the disease. It can be equated whether the expressions are functional or pathological. So each miasm has functional disturbances and each miasm has also the pathological disturbances. For example, in SORA, we get majority of the functional disturbances. And in other miasms, psychotic, syphilitic, and tubercular, we get both functional and pathological. So we must be conversant with the relationship of the miasm to the disease with respect to its functional capacity as well as its pathological experience, its pathological expressions. The different expressions of the disease are due to their miasmatic influence. So whatever disease expression is there, it is solely because of the miasmatic influence. When we study disease, we may be able to lose sight of miasm to its latent form. So Dr. J.H. Allen says that at times when we study, at times we may lose the sight of miasm because they are latent, they are quiescent, they are slumbering, they are sleeping, or they are not active. In short, the miasms are inactive. Therefore, at times when we study the disease, we are not being able to identify the miasm. Why? Because there is no expression. Many a time it is presented in new forms, but we cannot forget the dynamic nature of it. So Dr. J.H. Allen says that under favorable environmental influences, when the miasms get activated, it is presented in new forms, and it is only because of the dynamic nature of the disease. This dynamicity brings life and changes in the organism. So, because of the dynamic nature, there is life, and it brings changes in the life of the organism. The miasms are responsible for the disease expression. So, what changes does it bring? It brings about the changes of the disease, which are because of the miasmatic expression, or which is because of the miasms. As a result of miasms, there are disease expression. Thus, if we bring the life force under the law of similar, we will have no suppression. So therefore, if we treat a disease according to the law of similar, there will not be any suppression. Thus, if we did not recognize a life force or miasm, then we will be forced to go back to the chemical module, which has the empirical treatment. Dr. J.H. Allen says that if we did not recognize the life force, if we did not recognize miasm, if we did not recognize the law of similars, then we would be forced to go back to the orthodox school of treatment, in which they believed in a chemical combination of medicines, and this treatment was empirical in nature. That means what? It had no proof. They were just theories. They were building castles in the air that such and such a medicine was useful for such and such a disease. But no proof was there to show that this disease, this remedy X, was useful for the disease Y. It was just an thought or just an idea because of their own practical experience. By this sort of treatment, the life force is forced to become more and more deflected. So if such a treatment goes on, that if you do not recognize the life force, if you do not recognize the miasm, if you do not recognize the law of similars, then naturally you will only target the causative organism, or the causa morbi. That means what? You will not target the miasm, but you will target the materialistic cause of the disease. As a result of which, what will happen? The life force will become more and more deflected, or it will become more and more suppressed. Now the pathological states and the different conditions arise without any name. So he says, when suppression takes place, there will be different conditions which may also arise. The disease gets suppressed. Suppression is a retrograde process or a deflection of the law. So suppression is nothing but that if you go against the law, there will be a deflection. So that is nothing but a deflection of the law. Or in other words, it is the physiological law which is opposed. Or if you oppose the physiological processes in our body, or if you oppose the physiological laws or the physiological functions of our body, then suppression will take place. Thus, the physician who suppresses the miasmatic state, or in other words, the disease process, is the enemy of the law. So Dr. J.H. Allen says that those physicians who suppress the miasmatic states or the disease process, they do not believe in the law, or in other words, they are the enemy of the law. There is no mutual understanding between the physician and the law. So naturally, there is no mutual understanding between the physician and the law of similars. We must recognize these rules not only with visible things, but also with invisible things. So he says that, Dr. J.H. Allen says that we must recognize these rules not only with the visible thing, that means what? With the expressions, but also with the invisible thing, that is the life force. This is due to the fact that both life and disease originate from within outwards, from above downwards. So they say that this invisible life force is there, which originates from within outwards. So the vital force is present within us. When it gets deflected, these expressions are thrown outwards, as a result of which we get the symptoms. The very unit of life, that is the cell, works from within outwards or from its nucleus. So each, as you all know, our body is made up of millions of cells. Each cell is a unit of life which has this nucleus. From this nucleus, the life, or it is a storehouse of energy, and the energy from this nucleus is thrown out onto the millions of cells in the body, and life is there. Thus, life is within and not without. So therefore, Dr. J.H. Allen again reminds us that life is within and not from without. That means what? Life originates from the within, or from the interior of the organism, and not from the exterior. The disease is within and not on the surface. So the disease originates from within and it is not on the surface or from the exterior. It is seen only through the expression. So naturally, when the unit of life, when the cell is disturbed, naturally the expressions will be thrown out on the surface of the body. So therefore, life and disease are interconnected. Thus, Hahnemann defines life as it's a vital principle, a self-moving force, a vital power which, if acting in harmony, preserves our body in a harmonious whole, a disturbance of which is disease, a lack of which is death. So Dr. Hahnemann says that life is nothing but a vital principle, it's a self-moving force. So life is always a flow, it is never static. And it is a vital power which acts harmoniously and preserves our body in a harmonious whole. So this vital power or this vital principle acts on all the physiological processes in a harmonious way, as a result of which it preserves our body in a harmonious whole. So if all the physiological processes in our body are working in harmony with each other, there will be equilibrium in the body. Any disturbance of which is disease. But when this equilibrium is disturbed, or when the physiological processes in the body, they do not resonate with each other, then some disturbance is caused, as a result of which the disease sets in. And a lack of which is death. And naturally, the vital power or the vital principle is not there in the body, then naturally death will occur. Herbert Spencer says life is a continuous adjustment of internal relations to the external. Just like Dr. Hahnemann also says that life is a constant adjustment between the external and the internal environment. So Herbert Spencer says life is a continuous adjustment of internal relations to the external. So life has to be adjusted. The physiological processes in our body has to be adjusted according to the external inimical factors. So our body is there, is constantly exposed to these environmental factors which are inimical to life and which constantly bombard the individual, as a result of which the adjustment gets disturbed or there's a maladjustment and the disease will take place. Due to this virtue, we are labeled to be called alive. So because of the adjustment of our body from the internal relation to the external, we are still alive. So we are alive because of the constant adjustment our body makes from the internal to the external. Thus, our body is constantly adjusting ourselves to the external changes. So as I told you, our body is constantly adjusting or constantly fighting the inimical forces, and the vital principle is trying to act in a harmonious way, thereby maintaining life or maintaining good health. It causes changes in the whole organism. So, however, at times may come when the body is not being able to adjust to the external changes, as a result of which some changes are there in the whole organism. So what is responsible for the changes? The miasms are responsible for the imperfect adjustment. So the miasms are there, they're present in the latent state, quiet state, slumbering state, or inactive state. When activated, they become they are thrown out through the expression. So therefore, Dr. J.H. Allen says miasms are responsible for the imperfect adjustment. Thus, the external adjustment is imperfect only when the internal adjustment is imperfect. So naturally, as you all know, both are interrelated to each other. So when one environment is under maladjustment, the other environment also will be under maladjustment. So therefore, external adjustment is imperfect only when the internal adjustment is imperfect. Therefore, to conclude, the internal life rules the organism. So therefore, to conclude that, it says that the internal changes in the body which maintain the life, it rules the organism. That is the cell, that is the unit of life, the cell, the nucleus, which is the unit of life. Thus, therapeutic speaking, we must deal with the life which animates the organism. So therefore, therapeutically, if we see therapeutically, we have to deal with life which animates the organism. Nature's is the complement of life, but we must assist it through the right channels by way of the law. So life and nature, they both go hand to hand. We must go we must flow in the direction of nature and not against it. Then only it will become a complement of life. And then only they will be able to apply the correct law through the right channel. Disease also appears through the medium of the same law which governs the life. Thus, we must work with it along these lines. So disease also appears through the same medium of the same law which governs life. That is, nature which is complement to life, life also which is internal, the cell of unit of life which is necessary to maintain the harmonious flow. This is nothing but the expression of the miasms. Miasm is opposing force to the life force. So the miasm is the inimical force to the life force. In order to combat the disease, we must go with the life force. So in order to combat the disease, we must go with the life force and not against the life force, as the orthodox people of treatment. According to the orthodox school of medicine, they used to go against the life force. However, they never believed in the life force in the first place. But this is just for you to understand, I'm saying this. Any other way will cause a danger of suppression. So if you go against the life force, or if you do not believe in the dynamic nature of the disease, if you do not believe in miasm, and if you do not believe in the relationship between the internal and the external environment, and if you go against the vital force or the life principle, there'll be a danger of suppression. In other words, there's a greater deflection of the perverted life force. So what happens if you do not treat the patient according to the law of similars, and if you do not believe in the dynamic nature of the disease and the miasms which are responsible for it, then the disease will travel deeper into the organism, or suppression will take place. In other words, suppression is nothing but a greater deflection of the perverted life force. Perverted meaning already the disease life force. So life force which is already diseased, it will go from the superficial level to the deep level, or from the periphery to the center, from the less important organs to the more important organs. The life force reflects itself when suppressed through some external expression, like an eruptive disease, a diarrhea, or a neuralgia. So whenever the life force is suppressed, it will reflect itself through some external expression. So this suppression will be relieved or will be removed if the life force expresses itself through some separate channel, like an eruptive disease, a diarrhea, or a neuralgia. As you all know, that vital or the life force is nothing but energy. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be deviated, or it can only be moved from the superficial plane to the deep plane, or from the periphery to the center, from the less important organs to the more important ones. So therefore, when you are treating a suppressed case, as I told you, energy cannot be destroyed. So the energy which is there, it will channelize itself into a different direction, and it will give rise to a return of the original complaints, like an eruptive disease, a diarrhea, or an neuralgia. This is done because the internal economy of the patient is burdened with the miasm. In order to save the patient's life, the energy which is there, which is suppressed, it has to express itself in some other form in order to preserve life. This is only possible when the correct homeopathic remedy is administered according to the law. So this will only take place provided you give the homeopathic similem. If you do not give the homeopathic similem, and if you use the orthodox mode of treatment, there will just be suppression, and ultimately it will lead to the patient's death. So when the correct homeopathy remedy is given, the external expression like eruptive fever, disease or diarrhea or neuralgia will come up. That means what? There will be a return of the original symptom. So you know that you're on the right track, just wait and watch. The outward expression must relieve the inward expression. So whatever outward expression is there, the inward expression will also relieve it. So the cause lies internal. The body, the vital force tries to save life by throwing it out on a non-important part of the body. So that is the skin. So when the skin symptoms improve, you also know that the inward expression is also being healed. That is, the miasm is being destroyed. Death will result when these conditions are not equalized. So if these conditions are not equalized or not in equilibrium, then what will happen? Death will ensue. So if you do not give the correct homeopathic medicine or if you use the orthodox mode of treatment, you just go on suppressing. Ultimately, what will happen? There will be death. Thus, equilibrium should be balanced. So Dr. J.H. Allen again reminds us that there should be a balance of the equilibrium in the body. If it is not balanced, then the death will ensure. That is, we have to balance the effects of the miasm upon the perverted life force. So whatever the effects of the miasm are there, we have to properly adjust it to the perverted life force. To sum it up in a nutshell, suppression will take place if we do not follow the law of similar and we don't recognize the dynamic nature of the disease. So just in short, all what he has to say in these few pages, around 10 pages are there in the chapter. He says that suppression will take place if you do not follow the law of similars. And of course, you must also recognize the dynamic nature of the disease. If you do not recognize it, then there'll be more chances of suppression. Disequilibrium will be there and the disease will travel deeper into the organism. So naturally, what will happen? If you do not follow the law of similars, or if you don't recognize the dynamic nature of the disease, what will be there? Naturally, there will be chaos. There will be disequilibrium. And the body and the disease will go deeper into the organism. So that's all, folks. If you're new to this channel, please do subscribe to my channel. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And I hope it will be beneficial and useful for your exams which are coming up. Thank you very much.